Καλησπέρα λοιπόν. Έχουμε τη χαρά να φιλοξενούμε σήμερα μαζί μας την Μαρία Ριστάνη αλλά και τον Hampton. Ξεκινάω από την συζητήτριά μας, τη Μαρία Ριστάνη, η οποία διδάσκει στο τμήμα Αγγλικής Γλώσσας και Φιλολογίας. Το ερευνητικό της αντικείμενο κινείται στο χώρο του σύγχρονου αγγλικού και αγγλόφωνου θεάτρου, όπως και στο χώρο του ήχου και της ακουστικής δημιουργίας, εξετάζοντας συμπράξεις με τη θεατρική πράξη. Γι' αυτό ακριβώς είναι εδώ σήμερα, για να μας βοηθήσει σε αυτή τη συνάντηση με τον Hampton, που μας έρχεται από την Αγγλία. Είναι ένας Βρετανός καλλιτέχνης, δημιουργός ηχητικών performances. Ωστόσο, δραστηριοποιείται αυτή τη στιγμή στη Γερμανία. Την τελευταία 20ετία πειραματίζεται με την τέχνη της performance, καθοδηγώντας τους θεατές να δημιουργούν επιτόπου παραστάσεις, ακολουθώντας οδηγίες. Φέτος, στο Διεθνές μας Φεστιβάλ, φιλοξενούμε 2 από αυτές, το Quiet Volume στην Δημοτική Βιβλιοθήκη και το Not to Scale στο φουαγέ της Εταιρείας Μακεδονικών Σπουδών. Και βέβαια, να πούμε ότι πάρα πολλές από τις performances που έχει φτιάξει συνεχίζουν να περιοδεύουν σε όλο τον κόσμο, με εκδοχές σε περισσότερες από 60 διαφορετικές γλώσσες. Hello, happy to have you with us. Dear Ant, the floor is on you.
Hey, hello. Hi, everybody. I'm coming at you from France at the moment. I'm actually really not at all at my place, so I hope that the Wi-Fi will keep going and there's no disturbances. So I've got very little time to cover a lot of material, a lot of stuff. So this is about Autoteatro and also a more recent kind of offshoot of that for me, which is showing without going, which is not just my practice, but involves other people as well. And Autoteatro as well is kind of a strand of my work, which covers a lot of different collaborations with other artists, and not least Tim Etchells, who is my collaborator for the 2 pieces that are showing in the festival right now. In Thessaloniki, which I really hope you get a chance to experience. So for me, it's important to sort of rewind to 1999 to start talking about Autoteatro, because it really started for me all the way back then, when I was making some of my first work, and I was invited to do something in Paris. And I thought of a friend who I would like to see on stage, who had never been on stage. And so I was thinking, how can I make that happen? How can I make him be on stage without giving him the responsibility to take on the actor's role and all the responsibility that comes with it? How can we just let him be the person he is, who, in my opinion, is a kind of a beautiful person who doesn't really belong on stage. He's very presupposing and lazy in a way that I've always admired. So yeah, there was something about that where he not belonging on stage that, for me at the time, made it very attractive to see him there. So it was all very intuitive. And I thought, well, let's just give him instructions in the moment. Let's ask him if he would be okay with that. And so this asking of my friend Henri, would you do this? In a way, was the beginning of the practice that has extended all the way to today. That moment where I said to him, like, you don't need to worry about anything. We'll take care of the show. All you have to do is keep trying. Don't worry if you've made a mistake. And these words are the same words that we still say to people now when, like if you do your show, if you do the 2 shows in the festival right now, that's what the people looking after the piece will say to you. They'll say, don't worry if you make a mistake, just keep trying, try to follow all the instructions. So it's never been for me about playing with authority so much. it's always been about trying to set up instances of kind of trust in a way, where you agree to give, to trust a certain structure in the same way that you would when you open a book and agree to read the words. Actually, I mean, it's not much different in the end. It's just a slightly different kind of form when you're following instructions in the live performance sense. So let's go to 1999. I'm going to share my screen and we'll look at some.
Just a moment. Just
yes, you need to
short break to
translate. Okay.
Ο Hampton είναι αυτή τη στιγμή στη Γαλλία. Ελπίζω ότι τίποτε δεν θα μας διακόψει. Έχει πολύ λίγο χρόνο για να μας πει πολλά πράγματα για το Autoteatro και για την τεχνική του showing without going, που περιλαμβάνει βέβαια συνεργασίες και με διάφορους συνεργάτες, όπως ο Tim Etchells, που είναι ο συνεργάτης του για αυτές τις δύο παραστάσεις που παρουσιάζονται στο πλαίσιο του 4ου Διεθνούς Φεστιβάλ Δάσους. Γυρίζει πίσω λοιπόν στο 1999, όταν πρωτοβρέθηκε μπροστά στην πρόκληση και πρόσκληση να πάει στο Παρίσι και να εμπλέξει σε μια παράσταση ένα φίλο του, ο οποίος δεν είχε καμία σχέση με το θέατρο. Δεν ήταν ηθοποιός, δεν είχε ξαναπαίξει. Και αυτό ήταν μια μεγάλη πρόκληση για το πώς θα μπορούσε να εμφανιστεί στη σκηνή χωρίς το βάρος της ευθύνης ενός ηθοποιού, χωρίς πρόβες και χωρίς δύσκολη προετοιμασία. Έτσι βρέθηκε να δοκιμάζει, να πειραματίζεται, ένα πείραμα άλλωστε που φτάνει μέχρι σήμερα, με τον Ανρί, το φίλο του. Ξεκίνησε λέγοντάς του: μην ανησυχείς, ανέβα στη σκηνή και θα το φροντίσουμε εμείς. Αν συμμετέχετε σε αυτές τις παραστάσεις, τις δύο που παρουσιάζουμε στο 4ο Διεθνές Φεστιβάλ Δάσους, θα το δείτε κι εσείς. Δεν έχει να κάνει με την εξουσία του ανθρώπου που βρίσκεται πάνω σκηνή ή με την εξουσία του σκηνοθέτη, αλλά με την εμπιστοσύνη. Με την εμπιστοσύνη αυτού που φτιάχνει την παράσταση και αυτού που δέχεται να συμμετάσχει σε αυτή. Είναι κάπως όπως ανοίγεις το κινητό σου και διαβάζεις οδηγίες. Είναι τόσο απλό. Ο Αν θα μοιραστεί μαζί μας υλικό από αυτή τη λογική του Autoteatro. Please, you can share.
Okay, so no, I was thinking that I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So just to make a big distinction between this piece that I made in 1999 with the instructions to somebody unrehearsed. So I asked Henri, would you just agree to follow instructions moment by moment, no rehearsal at all? And I will explain to the audience that that's the situation so they don't get confused about it. And this was a very interesting, what I thought, experiment. And then I thought, okay, maybe this is a show, because I started doing it with different people and it was interesting each time. But it wasn't for about 2 years until I understood that actually it was a whole practice waiting to be explored. And that's what happened. And for the following 8 years, very often in collaboration with my working partner at the time, Silvia Mercuriali, under the name Protozaza, for 8 years we explored this way of making work. And if we look at this page, this is the old Protozaza website, and here you can see a very old website, which is for that piece called Blog, which was the very first one. And then after that, we made a whole lot of different pieces that were always working a little bit like in that first way. Like most of them were working in some ways with instructions to unrehearsed guest performers. And then in so then what happened in 2007 is that we tried something new, which was, because we kept being told by people it's very interesting to follow these instructions live, being in a performance situation on stage, and yet not knowing what was going to happen next, and knowing that the audience also doesn't know what's going to happen next, and sharing that experience. And we thought maybe if it's really an interesting thing for the performers, maybe we should be allowing the audience to have that experience as well somehow. And then we thought about conversation, like what happens when we're speaking with each other. And in a way, we thought actually that's somehow what's happening all the time. We're performing, but also listening, and we're negotiating that moment. And we thought how interesting it would be to use that as a model for performance. So then we made this piece called Etiquette. Now I need to show again. So Etiquette was the last of the collaborations with Silvia as Rotozaza, and the very first of the Autoteatro works that I made and that she made, and we both continued to make work in that strand. And this piece is now in many languages, unfortunately not in Greek, weirdly. We did actually try once, but the money ran out. And if we go to, I'm just going to, sorry, yeah, reload that so you can see the photograph. So this piece works for two people sitting opposite each other, and it happens in cafes. So there's no one around who understands that there's going to be that there's a show happening. There's nobody watching you. You're just doing it alone with each other, and the headphones tell you what to say to each other. So you're having a conversation in a cafe with a friend, and there's some things on the table which you move around. You're given instructions for what to do with them as well. And it's basically two audio tracks that are synchronized. So we start them at the same time. And Amalia, maybe you want to translate that lot, and then I'll play a little video to illustrate this.
Okay, thank you. Θα ήθελα λοιπόν να πω ότι ανάμεσα εκεί πίσω στα 1999, όπου ο φίλος μου Ενρή, χωρίς πρόβα, μόνο με οδηγίες και χωρίς να ξέρει τι θα συμβεί από λεπτό σε λεπτό πάνω στη σκηνή, ξεκίνησε αυτό το πείραμα. Στην πραγματικότητα χρειάστηκε 2 ολόκληρα χρόνια να δουλέψουμε μαζί και με την συνεργάτηδά μου Σίλβια Μαρκιουράλη για να καταλάβουμε ότι αυτό είναι μια πρακτική, ένας τρόπος που περίμενε να τον διερευνήσουμε, που περίμενε να τον κάνουμε performance, να τον εισάγουμε ως πρακτική της performance. Και σκεφτήκαμε ότι αν αυτό πετυχαίνει, τότε γιατί να μην το κάνουμε και με το κοινό. Τι συμβαίνει όταν συζητούμε, όταν γίνεται μια συζήτηση ανάμεσα σε 2 άτομα. Βασιστήκαμε σε αυτό το μοντέλο για να κάνουμε, παραδείγματος χάρη, το Etiquette, που είναι μια performance, η τελευταία μας συνεργασία με τη Σίλβια. Είναι μεταφρασμένο σε πολλές γλώσσες, δυστυχώς όχι ακόμη στα ελληνικά. Η όλη performance γίνεται μέσα σε ένα καφέ, ανάμεσα σε 2 άτομα που ακούγοντας 2 παράλληλα συγχρονισμένα ηχητικά κομμάτια, ηχητικά μαγνητοφωνημένες οδηγίες, οδηγούνται σε έναν διάλογο. Thank you, Anne. You can go on. We cannot hear you right now, Ant.
Sorry, I had it on mute. I'll start again. So one of the first important gigs that we had with Etiquette was in New York, and New York Times came along and made this little video. So we can just look at this for a few seconds.
Take a deep breath and clear your throat. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, now. And on the now precisely, place all your fingertips on the table. 1, 2, 3, now. This is the stage.
Okay, so I guess you understand the basics of how Autoteatro works from that. I guess, I mean, in a way, the potential behind the form was like immediately very exciting to us, and that piece was kind of somehow quite childish and playful and enthusiastic about its own device. And over the years, I've made many other pieces that work like that, and you can see them on my website here. And two of the very important ones, I would say, with Tim. We also made another piece as well in the middle, which is rather more site-specific. And some of these pieces are kind of tempting to look at from the outside, and yet they're really not for that. Like, for example, Guru, which is a piece for 5 different people sitting around a screen that you can sort of see like this. It's like a sort of fake group therapy session, which is pretty wild. And it is actually kind of fun to watch, but it's just really not designed for it. It's always something that you experience from the inside. And in fact, if we go to the page on Autoteatro, sorry, which is going to be here. I'm just going to read this here because this really explains things, I think, more clearly. So audience members perform the piece themselves for each other. Participants are given instruction via audio, visual cues, or text what to do or say. But simply follow these instructions, an event begins to unfold. One moment you may be watching or witnessing the others performing, not unlike a normal audience experience. The next, you may be doing or saying something which in turn creates a moment of performance to be witnessed by the other. So it's not to be confused with gaming or game show improvisation. Autoteatro does not require audience members to be clever or inventive, and it doesn't set up instances of competition. Okay, so it was important for us to define a little bit these things at the time, because there were in 2007 different forms were starting to emerge, and there was a lot of work which we really admired. For example, Janet Cardiff's audio walks, and we wanted to kind of distinguish what we were doing from that kind of work. It wasn't simply that we were using audio, it wasn't even that we were guiding people. It was this relational aspect to Autoteatro that was more, and trying to kind of elicit a performance from the other person, and in this kind of reciprocal way that feeds each other, and that can, in such a way that can continue through the sort of methodical arc of an experience. I think that's about. Well, I'll just go back to my notes a second. Yeah, I think that's about all to say. I mean, one thing I would say is that with the 2 pieces that are showing, my 2 collaborations with Tim Etchells, if etiquette and pieces like Guru or the extra people are quite expressive, there's a lot of voice and face and body involved. The participants are sort of facing each other. With the quiet volume and with not to scale, the performance that comes from one's own participation is a lot more focused on very microscopic movements of hands and fingers. So things like pointing, following a line of text or a line of pencil that you might draw, passing things, flattening papers, taking erasers. It's a lot about what the hands are doing. And you never really, you never speak to each other and you never look at each other. You have a very strong sense, I think, of somebody with you, a very strong sense of not being alone with a situation, which I think is important for both pieces. But there's this kind of pull away from the sort of frontal, straight to each other's face kind of situation, sort of doing something different there. Both pieces are with sitting side by side instead of opposite each other. So I think I need to sort of wrap things up there about Autoteatro. And shall we go from there straight into showing without going, and then leave some space afterwards?
Just a small pause for me to translate, and thank you.
Sure, okay.
Είδαμε ένα βίντεο λοιπόν της performance Ket, ξεκινώντας έλεγε πάρε βαθιά ανάσα, καθαρίστε το λαιμό σας, βάλτε τα ακροδάχτυλά σας πάνω στο τραπέζι. Αυτό είναι η σκηνή. Αυτά είναι τα βασικά στοιχεία της παράστασης, η δυναμική του ένας άνθρωπος να κάθεται απέναντι στον άλλον και να δημιουργεί μια ολόκληρη παράσταση για τον άλλον. Αυτό μας ενθουσίασε και από τότε κάναμε πολλές τέτοιες παραστάσεις. Κάποιες από αυτές site-specific, δηλαδή οργανωμένες για συγκεκριμένους χώρους και άλλες όχι. Έχει πολύ ενδιαφέρον να δει κανείς πώς λειτουργεί αυτό όταν το βλέπει και απ' έξω, όχι μόνο όταν συμμετέχει. Παραδείγματος χάρη να ανέφερε την περίπτωση του γκουρου, που μοιάζει με μια ομαδική ψυχοθεραπεία στην οποία συμμετέχουν 5 άτομα. Μας έδωσε κάποια βασικά στοιχεία για το τι είναι το Autoteatro, το οποίο ορίζει στο δικό του site που θα το ζητήσουμε μετά να μοιραστεί μαζί μας. Τα βασικά στοιχεία λοιπόν είναι ότι δεν είναι παράσταση, δεν είναι παιχνίδι, δεν είναι διαγωνισμός, δεν είναι προϋπόθεση το κοινό να είναι έξυπνο ή να αντιδρά με έναν εμπνευσμένο τρόπο. Είναι μια παράσταση που κάνει ο ένας άνθρωπος για τον άλλο, ακολουθώντας απλώς τις οδηγίες, και είναι ένας τρόπος να δημιουργείται μια εμπειρία ανάμεσα σε δύο ανθρώπους, μέσα από ούτε καν το γεγονός ότι χρησιμοποιούνται ακουστικά δεν είναι το σημαντικό για το Autoteatro. Περισσότερο είναι η δυνατότητα συμμετοχής, η εμπιστοσύνη που δημιουργεί αυτή την εμπειρία. Και αν το ετικέτ ή το γκουρου που ανέφερε πιο πριν είχαν σωματικότητα, είχαν λόγο, βρίσκονταν 2 ή περισσότεροι άνθρωποι ο ένας απέναντι στον άλλον, τα 2 κομμάτια που κάναν με τον Tim Etchells και συμμετέχουν στο φεστιβάλ, έχουν να κάνουν με 2 ανθρώπους που βρίσκονται πλάι-πλάι, δεν κοιτιούνται ποτέ στα μάτια, έχουν μπροστά τους χαρτιά ή άλλα αντικείμενα, και ο στόχος είναι με μικροσκοπικές κινήσεις στη σιωπή να δημιουργήσουν μια παράσταση ο ένας για τον άλλο. Υπογράμμισε την αίσθηση ότι δεν είναι κανείς μόνος, παρόλο που δεν κοιτάζει τον άλλο στα μάτια, παρόλο που δεν υπάρχει ευθεία διάδραση, νιώθει κανείς ότι δεν είναι μόνος. Thank you, Ant. You can go on.
Okay, so shifting now from the whole world of Autoteatro, which is quite big, there's like 10 different shows that I could talk about it for a long time, shifting into showing without going. So what is this? I need to say 3 things, I think, before we start, like a sort of 3 points. Sorry about the bells. I hope that's not going to disturb you guys. So 3 points. Maybe as you can see from the Autoteatro work, I personally like a lot the side of live performance culture, which values an economy of means. In other words, doing more with less. Second point for me is connected to that is that it seems clear that humans in general need to do less with less. So we're living in a period of obscenity. Human activity has become obscene in its equality and wastefulness. So that leads to the third point, which is in terms of my positions on things, that ecological collapse is real, it's happening, and situations like we've just lived with the pandemic will probably reoccur in different ways. So moving around may well again become increasingly difficult. And meanwhile, real exchange involving intimacy, empathy, and liveness will, I think, become ever more precious and necessary. So I think we need to get good at doing liveness at a distance. So when the pandemic hit, I think quite understandably, many people working in this field in live performance felt threatened, to say the least. Everybody asking themselves, how do we carry on? So there was a rush to somehow either transform live work into something that could still be shared and sold. And many people wondered if their live practice could survive such sudden shifts in format or context. And in this moment, there were some interesting discoveries, but along the way, the very point of making live performance was sometimes lost. And I think that many of us ended up sitting in front of screens, watching recordings of something that was once live or imagined to be live in its inception. So I was speaking with Caroline Bargnot at Théâtre Vidi Lausanne in Switzerland, and we both figured that something that was missing in, as far as we could see, was a kind of overview of just what is known in terms of practical approaches to making live work that can travel or be shared on its own, without the artist or the accompanying performers traveling with it. So in other words, what are the formats available? What are the tools and processes, that, especially formats, that have been employed so far or can be employed by artists doing this kind of work? So we wanted to make a sort of catalogue, basically just like showing what those possibilities were. And so we started to put together a working group from all over the world, 8 different artists and producers from pretty much every continent. A really wonderful group of people came together, and together we wanted to make this catalogue, but very quickly we decided that we should not just create a catalogue of practical approaches, but also the related theoretical considerations. So all the things we should be thinking about, or the questions that we should be asking ourselves if we want to make work like this that can be shown without going. And so having created these 2 catalogues of practice and theory, we then found that it was interesting when you combine the 2, and that we needed a kind of third space for people to create their own combinations of practice and theory. And we're going to look at what we call the atlas, which is these 3 spaces, but I'll let Amalia translate that.
Okay, thank you so much. Πριν ξεκινήσει, θέλει να μοιραστεί μαζί μας 3 σημεία πολύ σημαντικά για εκείνον, πηγαίνοντας στη φόρμα showing without going. Πρώτον, λέει, μου αρέσει στη ζωή η οικονομία των μέσων, να κάνω περισσότερα με λιγότερα μέσα. Οι άνθρωποι γενικά θέλουν να κάνουν λιγότερα αυτό τον καιρό, μοιάζουν με κάποιο τρόπο να κινητοποιούνται, είναι το δεύτερο σημείο. Και το τρίτο σημείο έχει να κάνει με αυτό που μας έκανε φανερό η πανδημία, δηλαδή ότι υπάρχει μια συνθήκη μέσα στην οποία είναι πολύ δύσκολο να μετακινούμαστε ελεύθερα. Άρα είναι απαραίτητο το να υπάρχει η αφαιρετικότητα, η ευκολία να δημιουργούμε εμπειρία, να δημιουργούμε ζωή, να επικοινωνούμε από μακριά. Με την πανδημία αυτό έγινε πολύ φανερό και όλοι αρχίσαμε να αναρωτιόμαστε πώς θα πάμε παρακάτω, πώς μπορούμε να μοιραζόμαστε, πώς μπορούμε να συνυπάρχουμε σε αυτή τη συνθήκη. Το να έχουμε ζωντανές παραστάσεις έγινε πάρα πολύ δύσκολο. Στην πραγματικότητα όλοι με τη φαντασία μας αναγκαστήκαμε να βρεθούμε μπροστά σε μια οθόνη και να φανταστούμε πώς είναι μια παράσταση. Έτσι, συνεργαστήκαμε στο θέατρο Vidi Lausanne ώστε να μπορέσουμε να βρούμε μια φόρμα που θα μας επέτρεπε να ταξιδέψουν οι παραστάσεις, αλλά χωρίς να ταξιδεύουν οι καλλιτέχνες. Ποια θα ήταν αυτή η φόρμα, ποια θα ήταν τα εργαλεία, ποιες θα ήταν οι τεχνικές που θα μας το επέτρεπαν. Θέλαμε να κάνουμε μια λίστα, έναν κατάλογο. Έτσι καλέσαμε 8 καλλιτέχνες και παραγωγούς από διαφορετικά μέρη του κόσμου και θέλαμε να δημιουργήσουμε όχι μόνο την πρακτική, τη φόρμα, αλλά και το θεωρητικό υπόβαθρο. Δηλαδή στην πραγματικότητα να θέσουμε τα ερωτήματα που χρειάζονταν για να μπορέσουμε να τα απαντήσουμε για αυτή τη φόρμα, για αυτόν τον τρόπο παράστασης. Καταλήξαμε σε 2 καταλόγους, τους οποίους ονομάσαμε μαζί ο Atlas, αυτό που θα μοιραστεί μαζί μας σε λίγο. Η πρώτη λίστα, ο πρώτος κατάλογος αφορά την πρακτική του θεάτρου showing without going και ο δεύτερος την θεωρητική του υπόσταση. Thank you, Ant. You can go on.
Okay, so let's have a look at the atlas. I will share my screen again. Go there. So this is the front page of the atlas, and I'm going to give you a chance to look at this yourselves in a moment. So it's showing without going .live, and if you click on more info, you've got plenty to read about there into a more nuanced and in-depth version of what I just said. And there's little bits from each of the artists and producers who were involved in this. So these are the basic blocks of the atlas, and really what we should be focusing on to begin with is like approaches and considerations. So there's basically practice and theory. If we click on approaches, we have all the different formats in a way, practical approaches like guided tour, radio, unrehearsed participative performance, instructions, protest, binaural audio, instructions to imagine. And if you click on any of these things like guided touch, touch the powerful sensory, there's something written about it there. And there's hashtags as well, different ways to do that. And if it interests you, there's a pin here. And if you click on the pin, you will find an area up here in the top right called pinned. If you click on there, these are going to collect in this area. So we're going to go back now to that element, which is guided touch. If we go back again, let's click on flash mob. That's an interesting one, maybe to some people. Let's read about it there. We think, that's interesting to me, let's pin it. And so on. So there's slightly different kind of colors to do with the different sort of hashtags and how they are, how they're done there. Let's do another one, like restaging. A work can be learned and rehearsed by a new artistic team in a place where it is to be restaged, making it possible for it to tour when the creator cannot travel. So let's say we pin that as well. And then these are all the practical things that we found out in our research that have been done so far. These are the different ways, and some of them are a bit wild, like exercise videos, but they're interesting. I mean, the fact is that these are all different ways of kind of conjuring liveness, and that can actually have an interesting kind of perspective on this challenge. So if we go back to the start and then click on considerations, we have these are kind of theoretical considerations, and they're organized in 3 columns: questions, spectrums, and statements. So questions and statements are kind of speak for themselves. Spectrums are kind of considerations that are not binary. So for example, what's a good one? Like, is the audience mentally active or physically active? Of course, those are not hard and fast binary options. Of course, they can be one or the other. And again, you can click on that and pin it if it's interesting. Let's go back and think about, responsibility. Is the responsibility with the artist or with the audience? And there's a spectrum, so it can be somewhere towards more the audience perhaps, or the artist. And it's just ways of prompting thinking. And absence, is the absence imposed? Like, are we dealing with someone in prison? Or is it chosen? Is it somebody who chooses to be absent? And what does that say? Now, in the questions, if you click on them, like here's this one called control. Let's click on that. There's something written about it. It might be harder for the artist to control how this work is situated, or how an audience interacts with the work. How present is the artist to guide the audience's experience? Does he also trust? So maybe that's interesting to us. Again, we click it. The importance of being lazy. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there, a lot of thought, and the list goes down quite a bit. And the statements are slightly more concise, and they're things that we felt just needed to be said sometimes. And they can be read through as well, and like everything, pinned for later perusal. Now, if we go to examples is there. Now, these are used in different ways. We really wanted to be clear that this atlas was not supposed to be a catalogue of existing work. We did not want to try and provide some kind of exhaustive who's who of work that is happening. It's just stuff that we knew about and that was useful as examples of form, of like formal proposals. So there's things from 1890 as well as things from kind of more recently. These examples, they crop up in the connections section, which is really the interesting one. So this is kind of the third space I was talking about, where you can make your own contributions to this area. So as you're going through the atlas, let's go to our pinned section again. So these are all there now. These are all the things that we pinned before thinking they were interesting. Of course, you can get rid of them if you want, but you can create a new, what we call connection here. So you give it a title and then you say something about it. And it's like a working space. So you think, what is the combination of these elements do? What does that kind of suggest? And it's ways of asking more questions, of workshopping a specific idea that you might have, either for an actual artwork or perhaps for a program of work, or a solution to a piece that cannot be shown, that was planned to be, that cannot travel, that was planned to travel. And these, when you add, they go to us and we just make sure that they're not some bot, and then we add them to the connections, of which there are now many, as you can see when you scroll down the thing. So this is kind of a constantly evolving section. And if you click on any of these, like performance that I imagine in my home, so here you see the different elements that have been used for that. There's a little text about it, and you can browse also from there. So it's another way in to the atlas, is that you can kind of browse those elements. Like instructions to imagine is a really interesting one, and as you can see, it's been used in a lot of different connections. So that's the element with the text. You can pin it, and then these are all the different connections where that element has been used so far. So having explained that, I would really love just to let you explore this for yourself for 10 minutes before we come back together and just chat further about both the Autoteatro work and this, if you have any questions. So the URL for this is, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, showing without going.
I have already put it in the chat, but
okay.
Do yourself as well. It would be very interesting, very useful.
Yeah, so yeah, if you have a look at that and just explore it for 10 minutes to see, have a look around and see where you get to, and then we'll come back and chat.
I will just take 2 minutes from this just to explain what's going on with Atlas. Πολύ γρήγορα λοιπόν να μεταφράσω τα όσα μας είπε. Στον Άτλαντα λοιπόν είναι συγκεντρωμένες όλες οι φόρμες, έχει γίνει μια προσπάθεια να καταγραφούν όλες οι φόρμες, οι μορφές, με παραδείγματα, εφαρμογές για κινητά, ανεβάσματα παραστάσεων που έχουν ήδη ανέβει σε άλλο μέρος του κόσμου με άλλο θίασο. Είναι μια μεγάλη πρόκληση, τόσο οι πρακτικές, όσο και το θεωρητικό κομμάτι των ερωτήσεων. Επίσης, στο θεωρητικό κομμάτι μπορεί κανείς να βρει τα ερωτήματα που έθεσαν, αλλά μπορεί να βρει και θεωρήσεις, τοποθετήσεις για διάφορα ζητήματα, επίσης τις θέσεις που πήραν ή καταγράφηκαν κατά τη διάρκεια του project και βεβαίως το σημαντικότερο, χρήσιμα παραδείγματα από διαφορετικές και στοιχεία από διαφορετικές χρονικές περιόδους, ακόμη και από τον προηγούμενο αιώνα. Το site αυτό είναι δυναμικό, δηλαδή μπορεί κάποιος να προσθέσει ερωτήσεις, παραδείγματα ή να ενημερώσει για project ή προγράμματα που δεν μπόρεσαν παραδείγματος χάρη να ταξιδέψουν και πώς το αντιμετώπισαν αυτό. Έχει χρήσιμους συνδέσμους. Παραδείγματος χάρη μας έδειξε έναν από τους συνδέσμους στην παράσταση που φαντάζομαι στο σπίτι μου, μέσα στο σπίτι μου. Εκεί μπορούμε να βρούμε χρήσιμες οδηγίες, στοιχεία και πού χρησιμοποιήθηκαν μέχρι αυτή τη στιγμή. Μας αφήνει λοιπόν, μας επιτρέπει για 10 λεπτά να το εξερευνήσουμε λίγο αυτό το site και να γυρίσουμε πίσω με περισσότερες ερωτήσεις. Θα δώσω τότε το λόγο στη Μαρία Αριστάνη. Βλέπω ότι είναι μαζί μας και ο πρόδρομος ο Τσινικόρης, που είναι ο ίδιος σκηνοθέτης και performer και ανήκει στην Καλλιτεχνική Επιτροπή του 4ου Διεθνούς Φεστιβάλ Δάσους. Οπότε λέμε ότι βρισκόμαστε πίσω 9 παρα 5 για να ξεκινήσουμε το κομμάτι των ερωτήσεων. Ευχαριστώ.
Okay, so when everyone's ready, we can come back again. So, hi. So that's about it. It feels a bit strange to take this kind of break to explore something like that, but maybe nice as well. I hope it has been enough for people to just get the idea, at least in terms of what we put together there. But yeah, I'm interested to know if there's any questions at all, and we don't have much time left. I don't know how strict you guys need to be about finishing at 8, but
καταρχάς να πούμε ότι θεωρεί ότι δεν είναι πολύς ο χρόνος των 10 λεπτών για να εξερευνήσει κανείς μια τέτοια ιστοσελίδα με τόσα πολλά παραδείγματα, αλλά τουλάχιστον πήρατε μια ιδέα και θα μπορούσατε να θέσετε ερωτήματα στο chat. Θα δώσω το λόγο στη Μαρία Ριστάνη για να θέσει κάποια ερωτήματα, όχι μόνο όσον αφορά την ιστοσελίδα αυτή που είδαμε βέβαια, αλλά γενικότερα την πρακτική του Autoteatro και του showing without going. Μαρία, ο λόγος είναι δικό σου. And the floor is on Maria Ristani just to set 1 or 2 questions. And then whoever likes can write a question in the chat box so that we can answer it just afterwards.
Okay, great. So thank you, Ant, for putting words in your works. That was wonderful to listen. And thank you, Amalia, also for accommodating this wonderful discussion today. I think we can do this. I can pose the question in English, and perhaps then you will allow me some time and to self-translate in Greek before you answer, if that works. We can start with Autoteatro, since this is also how you started. When you were browsing through the website, I sort of read in some lines below that the way you visualize this artistic world is a world with no hierarchies, a world with no established power dynamics. And it is indeed the case. I felt this myself when I experienced your pieces, that there's no audience to judge, there's no director to sort of suggest or guide you along, there is no knowledgeable actor or actress to perform, you are allowed to experiment. But I have this question about the voice, the guiding voice that reaches us through the headphones. Some kind of power hierarchy. Isn't it the case that we are controlled in a sense by that voice, and we need to comply with its instructions? So I'd love to hear your response to that.
Yes, absolutely.
If I can
yes.
very, very quickly translate, like summarize in Greek. Αυτό που έθεσα ως ερώτημα, επειδή όταν πολύ όμορφα μας διάβασε ένα απόσπασμα από το Autoteatro στην ιστοσελίδα του, είδα ότι μιλάει για την έλλειψη ιεραρχίας δυνάμεων σε αυτόν τον κόσμο του Autoteatro, και είναι όντως έτσι. Και από το προσωπικό μου βίωμα είδα ότι δεν υπάρχει αυτή η γνωστή ιεραρχία και ισορροπία δυνάμεων που ξέρουμε συχνά με τα δεδομένα μιας παράστασης. Δεν υπάρχει το κοινό που κρίνει, δεν υπάρχει ο σκηνοθέτης που κατευθύνει, δεν υπάρχουν ηθοποιοί που ίσως γνωρίζουν και ερμηνεύουν καλύτερα. Είμαστε ελεύθεροι να πειραματιστούμε. Απλά η ερώτησή μου είναι για τη φωνή, αυτή τη φωνή που φτάνει μέσω ακουστικών, πόσο τελικά καθοδηγεί, ελέγχει την εμπειρία και πόσο η φωνή δημιουργεί την ίδια ιεραρχία δυνάμεων που είμαι σίγουρη ότι θέλει να αποφύγει στο Autoteatro.
So yeah, you're right to have noticed that in the text that was kind of scrolling past fast. Although I would say that it's not that there's no power dynamics, it's rather that, I mean, there's always the power dynamics going on with performance, no matter how you do it. But it's an attempt to try and sort of equalize either side of the stage. So, you know, as Jérôme Bel famously said, you know, about his large audience in Paris, like, if you don't try to dominate this audience, they will try to kill you. So, you know, like a large audience is very used to wanting to be dominated by spectacle or by the sort of power of the stage, which can be very powerful. And equally, you know, it is possible for an audience to become extremely dominant and powerful as well. So insofar as I'm interested in participation and the involvement of the audience, the horror of theatrical participation, which I fully share, is of course, like, you know, okay, we need one person and everybody else is safe and one poor guy has to come up on stage. Of course, there's some people who do that very well, and it can be a joy as well. I'm thinking of like good circus or something, or street performance, but it's not really what this is about at all. And it's when the participatory stakes are shared by everybody involved, it allows you to kind of contribute to get involved, I think, in a different way, and it allows you to kind of throw yourself in a bit more. But then you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's always the voice telling you what to do, or sometimes not the voice, but something written on paper. It can be text, or it can come visually, as in my last piece called Two Adults and a Child, where people simply copy what they see on screens. And all these ways of giving instructions are, of course, you know, there is an authority there, and none more so perhaps than the voice. And it's interesting that I like that you pick up on that, because I know that you are busy with Beckett, and I think about this a lot in relation to his work as well. And just the problem of a voice, full stop. So it's something that we became aware of immediately with the quiet volume when we started making it 12, 13 years ago now, because, well, first of all, we did our first test in a library and we didn't record it in whispers to begin with. The instructions were just spoken out loud, and it immediately felt like, oh God, we're not allowed to do this. When you hear somebody speaking to you in headphones, not whispering, in a library, it just felt like, okay, this is all wrong. And so from the sort of practical side of wanting to slip into the feeling of the library, we started doing it in whispers. And then that suddenly opened up into this world of a more democratic voice where all our whispers are slightly more similar to each other. And so we started to get away from the problem of psychology and identity being packaged up with voice, which it so often is. It's like leaking identity, our voices, all the time. And so, because if you have a voice telling you what to do, you're immediately thinking, okay, who is this? Is it a man or a woman, or is it not clear? Is it, what is their status? Where are they coming from? What do they sound like? All these questions. And of course, most of the time, we just don't want people to be thinking about that stuff. So the whispered voice was pretty interesting in that way. Like, I mean, we try to kind of keep the focus on what the voice is sharing with you in terms of the observation of the text or what's happening around you. We try to get people's awareness away from the voice, and then later in the piece, with the child's voice, with the old lady's voice, with these voices that are less transparent servants of the text, who are having more difficulty reading, then the focus comes back to the voice as an object, as an identity, where it hasn't really been there before. That's what we tried to do in that piece. There's probably quite a lot for you to translate there, so I'll let you go.
Amalia, will you?
Ναι, μπορώ. Θα ήθελα τη βοήθειά σου βέβαια. Η Μαρία λοιπόν έθεσε το θέμα του ελέγχου και ο Άντι είπε ότι δεν είναι ακριβώς ότι δεν υπάρχει έλεγχος ή ιεραρχία. Πάντα υπάρχουν αντικρουόμενες δυνάμεις πάνω στη σκηνή, στο θέατρο. αν θες να κυριαρχήσεις το κοινό σου βέβαια, υπάρχει ο κίνδυνος το κοινό σου να εξεγερθεί, να σε σκοτώσει, να βρεθείς στον κίνδυνο. Κινδυνεύεις. Βέβαια, πάντα κάποιοι στο θέατρο αναπτύσσουν δεξιότητες να κάνουν πράγματα καλά. Και μάλιστα μπορούμε να μιλήσουμε και για μορφές εκτός του κλασικού θεάτρου, θέατρο δρόμου ή τσίρκο, αλλά δεν είναι αυτό, δεν έχει να κάνει με αυτό. Η φωνή, την οποία ανέφερε η Μαρία, ή κάτι γραπτό, ένα σημείωμα που μπορεί να σου δώσει μια οδηγία, όπως το κάνει ο Αντ στην τελευταία του παραγωγή, που έχει τον τίτλο «Δύο ενήλικες και ένα παιδί», έχει να κάνει με τις οδηγίες περισσότερο. Όταν έφτιαχνε πριν από 12-13 χρόνια το Quiet Volume, άνοιξε ένας κόσμος μέσω του ψιθύρου, όπου ο ψίθυρος σε κάνει να χάνεις την ταυτότητα του ατόμου που μιλάει. Επίσης υπάρχουν μέσα στο πλαίσιο της βιβλιοθήκης, υπάρχουν άνθρωποι που συνέχεια ψιθυρίζουν, άρα η προσοχή σου δεν στρέφεται στο ποιος είναι αυτός που μιλάει, αλλά κυρίως σε αυτό που μοιράζεται μαζί σου. Βέβαια, αργότερα με τη φωνή του παιδιού ή μιας γυναίκας μεγάλης ηλικίας, η προσοχή μας μπορεί να ξαναγυρίσει στη φωνή. Επίσης, έκανε μια αναφορά στον Μπέκετ, Μαρία, και εδώ ήθελα τη βοήθειά σου λίγο για τον τρόπο με τον οποίο χρησιμοποιεί τη φωνή και τις οδηγίες ο Μπέκετ.
Ότι δεν είναι μόνο η φωνή, ότι τράβηξε η φωνή τη δική μου προσοχή, προφανώς επειδή ασχολούμαι με το Μπέκετ, στον οποίο η φωνή είναι καθοριστική, αλλά ότι, όπως είπες και εσύ, μπορεί να μην είναι μόνο η φωνή που θα δώσει οδηγίες, αλλά και ένα κομμάτι κειμένου.
Αυτή είναι η απάντησή του, επομένως. Ο λόγος και πάλι σε σένα.
I fully side with what you've said on whispering, and because I felt the same with the Quiet Volume. At the beginning, I was struggling to decipher the gender of the person speaking, exactly because of the whispering. So I fully side with what you're saying. Another thought and another question that I'd like to share with you is why the couple, why the audience dyad? Is this your way to counter, in a sense, the privatization of the headphone experience? Is this your way to add a conversational element? Because the headphone medium is all about, you know this better than I do, it's all about this acoustic bubble, this acoustic blanket that closes in on us and sort of separates us from the world around. And that's the trigger and the trouble that I find with most audio-based works, but I don't find it in yours. Perhaps because it's the dyad, it's the audience dyad that counters this feeling of auditory isolation. But I'm wondering, is this the reason for the coupling of the audience, or are there other reasons behind it?
It's a very interesting question. I think there's a number of different reasons. I mean, one of them, to be honest, is practical in that, I mean, we don't want people to be on their own. Like it's, as I say, the whole Autoteatro thing is relational. And I have done works with different arrangements. So Guru Guru, for example, is 5 people. There's one called OK, which is 4 people. There's the extra people, which was basically 45 people all synchronized together. But those ones are, the more people you involve, the more difficult actually it is to organize, because if there's one person missing, you start to have to like run around town saying, does anybody want to do this? Because there's 4 people waiting and we need a 5th, like, you know. And it's, after a while, I found myself sort of gravitating back towards the couple thing, because it's just so efficient. And it's actually very lovely also on a practical level, because if one person wants to do the piece, they have to do the work of finding someone else a lot of the time, which actually means that theatres end up doubling their audience with these pieces quite often. You know, like you might want to go and see a piece and not want to be on your own, so you bring a friend. you don't have to find someone else, whereas here you do. And I quite like that sort of thing. You end up finding that there's a second person coming into a theatre for the first time, just simply because they've been invited in like that. I like this kind of pairing up routine. But beyond that, I mean, I guess with Etiquette, that first piece in the cafe, it was so much based on the idea of a conversation between two people. And we took a piece from Jean-Luc Godard's film Vivre sa vie, the last scene of that film where there's a philosopher talking with Anna Karina in a cafe about the problem of trusting your words to express your thoughts properly. And here, of course, it's interesting because you don't have that problem. Someone's just giving you the words to speak and you discover them having spoken them pretty much. You don't even know how the sentence is going to finish. And so it was nice that you used this word bubble in relation to the headphones, because we think of the same thing in terms of the bubble that you're in within the kind of public space of a cafe when you're having a conversation. It's just, you know, you sort of, you forget about the other people in a way. You're suddenly within this private sphere of the conversation with someone else. And then it can happen that you separate from that bubble back into your own again. And then you join again, and then suddenly you realize that you're in a cafe and you remember where you are. And this is something that we play with a lot in that piece. In the same happens a lot with the quiet volume, I think, and Not to Scale. Your awareness of what's going on is fundamentally what makes up, I think, the musculature of how the piece works dramaturgically. So in terms of how it moves from place to place is, I hope, a lot of the time, a sort of movement from being very isolated and on your own, for example, at the beginning of the piece where you're looking around and thinking things, but in contact with your surroundings, and then going into a very personal bubble of reading, and then having this almost perverse experience of the reading experience leaking out into the sphere of the person who you're sharing it with. Because similarly to the headphone experience, one is used to the reading experience being a very private and solo one. And perhaps the experience of sharing it takes one back to childhood again, and in a way that feels, I mean, some people have called it perverse, when you're doing it in a library, in this kind of very grown-up adult setting of a public reading room. So, and it's kind of similar with drawing, I think. I mean, with Not to Scale, you know, I think as an adult, if you're doing any kind of doodling at all, most people, it's kind of pretty much private. I mean, and, you know, I think those who are confident drawing and doodling are going to be mostly a minority. And certainly the piece does not suppose that you're good at drawing. And so this idea of sharing this attempt at, you know, drawing elephants or whatever is quite a kind of, you know, it's a small leap, but it's nevertheless, you have a moment of like, how is this going to work? I can't draw. Like, how is this going to end up? And I like very much this feeling of potential catastrophe in performance and in participation. I don't like so much like cutesy kind of safe participation. Like there's something that feels very cloying very quickly about that. But just to finish the answer to your question, another thing to do with headphones and how to get away from that kind of singular bubble feel, which can feel sometimes claustrophobic. One technical thing, well, there's two things. One is simply that we use headphones which are very deeply researched and which are open. So you simply do hear everything in the space. And that really helps a lot. You just simply know that if someone opens the door, you're going to hear it. Your brain knows that because of the kinds of headphones that you're wearing, and that you're already wearing them before the piece starts. But then together with that, there's this binaural recording technology that we use a lot in both pieces that we're showing there. And that's a thing that I love using, and which is you can really play with a lot, where you record with the microphones where your ears are. Mm-hmm. So when you're listening back with headphones, you're hearing exactly what a pair of ears with a head in between them would hear. So you're recreating the architecture of the head, and therefore all the precise kind of spatial data of that place. And if you listen to it in a similar environment, it becomes quite uncanny, and you have a very kind of, you can make things happen that seem very realistic. Yeah.
A very strong awareness of surrounding space.
Yes, exactly. Or a fictional awareness. I mean, you can make things. Yeah. In any case, an awareness pulling attention to the space around you, as opposed to just some kind of personal bubble. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow, it's 8:15. I'm noticing this.
Yes, we just have to translate, and then I'll just ask anybody that might want to,
of course,
to ask a question,
sure.
set a question, if they cannot write it in the chat box, please raise hands or open your microphones and ask directly. Because time is passing and we have to... Okay. Αν κάποιος θέλει να κάνει ένα σχόλιο, να θέσει ένα ερώτημα, αφού μεταφράσουμε αυτή την τελευταία ερώτηση της Μαρίας Ζεστάνη και την απάντηση του Hampton, μπορεί να γράψει κατευθείαν στο chat ή να σηκώσει χεράκι μέσα από τις αντιδράσεις του Zoom ή και να ανοίξει το μικρόφωνο του να την θέσει κατευθείαν την ερώτηση, καθώς ο χρόνος μας περνά και θα πρέπει να ολοκληρώσουμε αυτή τη συζήτηση. Μαρία, σου δίνω το λόγο για να μεταφράσεις τη δική σου ερώτηση καταρχάς.
Mm-hmm. Η ερώτηση ήταν την επιλογή του Hampton σε κάποιες από τις δουλειές του, οι θεατές να είναι σε διάδα. Και η ερώτησή μου είναι ποιος είναι ο λόγος πίσω από αυτή την επιλογή της διάδας και αν ο λόγος είναι μια προσπάθεια να αντιστρέψει αυτή την εξατομίκευση της εμπειρίας που φέρνουν τα ακουστικά, η χρήση των ακουστικών σε μια παράσταση. Μιλήσαμε λιγάκι για τα ακουστικά ως τη χρήση των ακουστικών ως μια απομονωτική εσωτερική εμπειρία, ένα bubble, μια φούσκα, μια ακουστική φούσκα, που συχνά περικλεί τον ακροατή, την ακροάτρια και τον αποκόβει από τον περιβάλλοντα χώρο. Και η ερώτησή μου είναι αν αυτός είναι ο λόγος της επιλογής της διάδασης ή αν υπάρχουν άλλοι λόγοι πίσω από μια τέτοια επιλογή.
Ο Αντ λοιπόν απάντησε ότι στην πραγματικότητα έχει κάνει δουλειές και με περισσότερα άτομα, κάποιες φορές με 5 όπως τον Γκούρου, κάποιες έχει φτάσει μέχρι τα 45 άτομα. Και όσο περισσότεροι είναι, λέει, βέβαια τόσο πιο δύσκολο είναι να κατευθύνεις τη δράση. Προσπαθούν, είναι ενδιαφέρον το ότι αυτό συμβαίνει, το ότι ψάχνουμε έναν άνθρωπο να μοιραστούμε αυτή την εμπειρία, αλλά αυτό συμβαίνει ούτως ή άλλως και στη ζωή, στο θέατρο, όταν βγαίνουμε έξω, ψάχνουμε έναν άνθρωπο. Στο ετικέτ, παραδείγματος χάρη, που είμαστε σε ένα καφέ, σε έναν εξωτερικό χώρο, παίρνει μια σκηνή από ταινία του Γκοντάρ και εμπνέεται για να μπορέσει να στήσει αυτό το διάλογο. Και τι συμβαίνει δραματουργικά μια μετακίνηση, ενώ οι άνθρωποι βρίσκονται σε ένα συγκεκριμένο χώρο, συμβαίνει μια μαγική μετακίνηση σε άλλους χώρους, σε άλλους τόπους, όπως συμβαίνει ακριβώς στο Not to Scale και στις δύο παραστάσεις, στις δύο performances που παρουσιάζονται στο πλαίσιο του φεστιβάλ. Επίσης, σημειώνει ότι αυτή η σχέση της παιδικότητας, του να κάνω, παραδείγματος χάρη, είναι ένα σκίτσο που συνήθως οι άνθρωποι δεν το μοιράζονται με τους άλλους, ή της δημιουργίας ενός φανταστικού κόσμου, συνδυάζεται, κάπως έρχεται να γεφυρωθεί με την ενήλικη εμπειρία του. Είμαι σε έναν χώρο μαζί με έναν άλλον, πιθανόν έναν χώρο βιβλιοθήκης, όπως το Quiet Volume. Κάπως αυτό που είναι προσωπική εμπειρία και σχέση με την παιδική ηλικία έρχεται να γεφυρωθεί με την ενήλικη εμπειρία του μοιράσματος, του ενήλικου μοιράσματος. Και επίσης και τεχνικά μας είπε ότι το είδος των ακουστικών που χρησιμοποιεί είναι τέτοιο ώστε να μην σε απομονώνει από το περιβάλλον, από τους ήχους, από ό,τι συμβαίνει στον περιβάλλοντα χώρο, να μην δημιουργεί αυτή τη φούσκα που είπες, Μαρία, αλλά να δίνει τη δυνατότητα να ακούς το τι συμβαίνει γύρω σου, να παρατηρείς και να, αν ανοίξει μια πόρτα, παραδείγματος χάρη στη βιβλιοθήκη, να μπορέσεις να την ακούσεις παρόλο που θα ακούς και την ψιθυριστή φωνή. Και το τελευταίο τεχνικό σημείο που έτσι παρατήρησε είναι ότι και στον τρόπο με τον οποίο ηχογραφεί ακολουθεί την αρχιτεκτονική του ανθρώπινου εγκεφάλου, έτσι ώστε ο ήχος, αν κατάλαβα καλά, έτσι ώστε ο ήχος, οι ήχοι, οι διαφορετικοί ήχοι που συνθέτουν πέρα από τη φωνή, τα ηχοτοπία των performances, να μπορούν να φτάσουν με τη σειρά, με τη σωστή σειρά και να κατασκευάσουν έναν κόσμο όπως ο ανθρώπινος εγκέφαλος κατασκευάζει αυτόν τον κόσμο όταν δέχεται τα ερεθίσματα από το φυσικό περιβάλλον. Άρα ο στόχος του δεν είναι η απομόνωση, αλλά είναι να δημιουργήσει γέφυρες με αυτό που συμβαίνει κάθε στιγμή μέσα σε ένα χώρο, αλλά και αυτό που συμβαίνει μέσα από την εμπειρία που μεταδίδεται από τα ακουστικά και το μοίρασμα με τον άλλο ή τους άλλους ανθρώπους που βρίσκονται γύρω. Νομίζω ότι κάπου εδώ σιγά σιγά θα πρέπει να ολοκληρώσουμε. Αν κάποιος, κάποια θέλει να θέσει ένα ερώτημα, παρακαλούμε, κάντε το. Είμαστε εδώ για να ακούσουμε τα ερωτήματά σας. Ωραία. Ωραία, όχι καλά. Θα προτιμούσα αυτή η συζήτηση να γίνει σε φυσικό χώρο και να έχουμε τη δυνατότητα να θέσουμε ερωτήματα. Παρόλα αυτά, χαίρομαι πολύ που βρεθήκαμε σήμερα εδώ. And thank you so very much for being with us, for sharing with us all this information and, let's say, keys to open up all this magic world of Autoteatro and showing without going. Μαρία Αριστάνη, ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που ήσουν μαζί μας και νομίζω τα ερωτήματα που έθεσες στον Hampton μας βοήθησαν να καταλάβουμε ακόμη καλύτερα τον τρόπο με τον οποίο ο ίδιος φτιάχνει τις παραστάσεις του. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ όλους σας που ήσασταν σήμερα εδώ μαζί μας. Καλή συνέχεια και ελπίζουμε να σας δούμε στις αίθουσες του Κρατικού Θεάτρου Βορείου Ελλάδος στη συνέχεια του 4ου Διεθνούς Φεστιβάλ Δάσους. Καλό βράδυ σε όλους. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amalia.
Good night to everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, Maria.
Thank you very much, Aunt. Thank you very much. Do we have a question in the chat box or no? Okay.
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Have a nice day.
Καλό βράδυ.